to sink a body in. Whenever you're ready.
My name is Eric Tipton. 2015, I was out here in Salt Fork. The thing that made this day different than any other was normally I would drop down off of the ridge, jump into my truck, and leave for the day. This particular day and this weekend, I had my wife, my research partner at the time, and his girlfriend with us, and we were camping up at the campground. So my wife and his girlfriend had actually dropped us off that morning. So we went in, we researched, did our thing. When we dropped back out, as we were coming out, we knew that we were being paralleled. We were familiar with the sounds that they do when you're in an area like that and you've been going into the area for so long. There is a comfort state that they get in with you, and they allow you, and this is throughout a long period of time of going in, coming out, and doing the research. You're able to go in a little farther throughout time, and they build this comfort level, this almost like a trust with you. But they also let you know when the day's done, you're done. And that's usually followed by with a vocal or an aggression of what we believe they do is like a tree knock, bashing of a tree with something. And we always respected that and respected those sounds, and we knew that was them telling us it's time to leave for the day. So that particular day when we were coming out, we knew that we were being paralleled on both ridges. As we dropped down and onto the road, instead of jumping in the truck and leaving, we'd actually walk through the road to this spot here on this bridge. We had stripped all of our gear off of us. My partner at the time was kicked back on this guardrail, had his back to the marsh and to the channel, and I'm standing pretty much right here. And as we're talking, I just glance up. Now it's all overgrown at this point, but I glance up, and out in the marsh is a tree. And as I look up, I see this arm pushing this branch up out of its way, and it took a step, and as soon as it looked up, we locked eyes. And at that point, I just froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything but stare at this thing. It's such the only way I can describe it, and I have described it on podcasts and stuff like that, is you just automatically go through this meltdown process in your mind of what it is that you're actually physically looking at. Because at such a young age, we're taught everything growing up of how to identify and what it is. So when you finally lay your eyes on something like this, your brain goes through this meltdown process, and it's trying to gather as much information as it can of what it is that you're looking at. So I just froze. And my partner's still talking. He has no idea what's taking place right now. And as it stepped up and made eye contact with me, it stands straight up, it flares back. No sign of aggression or anything. Honestly, it literally had a look on its face like, oh crap, like I just screwed up. And we stood there for a couple seconds. He finally turned to his right. His head didn't move, his head stayed with me. He turned to the right, and then he took a step and he dropped down into the marsh and disappeared. Now at that point, as soon as he disappeared, I took off running down the road. I wanted to try to get another vantage point of him. And my partner, all he knew is we were running. I could hear him grabbing gear behind me and running with me. He had no clue what was happening. So as I came around the bend and I stepped into the marsh, the weeds in the marsh, I'm 6'1", and the weeds in the marsh came up to here on me. And what I'd seen of it was from the waist up. Now, at this point, the largest print we had found up in our research area was roughly 20 inches long, 9 to 10 inches wide, I believe. So once he disappeared, I couldn't get a vantage point of him. That's when the adrenaline kicked. That's when all the emotions started coming. Now my partner, he just automatically starts drilling me, like with question after question after question. He wanted to keep it fresh in my mind, everything that I just seen. But the whole time it was like I could have just dropped to the ground and started crying, just bawling like a child. And for me though, it was validation of everything that we had done, all the research we had done, everything leading up to that point, to me standing here, and there it was, in physical form, there he was.
Ohio is full of surprises. First-time visitors often have their expectations subverted by the state's geological diversity. There are flatlands and foothills, a Great Lake, the state's historic namesake river, and metropolitan regions whose amenities are, by any standard, world-class. It's been suggested that before the arrival of European explorers, as much as 95% of Ohio land was mature hardwood forest dominated by towering oak, hickory, maple, and chestnut trees. It's sobering to consider that settlement, industry, and agriculture shrank that percentage to the single digits by the beginning of the 20th century. However, conservation efforts have promoted incredible regrowth to the point that 30% of Ohio supports thriving forest life today. Bordered by 6 states, Ohio can be split into 5 regions, each with their own unique qualities. The northern Great Lakes Plains are a fertile lowland, while the Lake Erie shoreline, also in the north, features clay and sand beaches, tall bluffs, and dunes. The Till Plains in the western center of Ohio are thought of as the beginning of America's Corn Belt due to the region's productive soil. And far to the south is the Bluegrass region, which, as the name suggests, shares numerous qualities with neighboring Kentucky. But the largest region, spanning almost the whole eastern half of the state, is the Appalachian Plateau, with rugged hills and scenic waterways ideal for any number of outdoor activities. Not coincidentally, the plateau is where regrowth has accelerated, and with the woods has come wildlife in abundance. Realizing this, the state of Ohio has set aside extensive parcels of land for the twin purposes of recreation and conservation. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources protects 800,000 acres of land, 120,000 acres of inland waters, 7,000 miles of streams, 481 miles of the Ohio River, and 2.25 million acres of Lake Erie. The ODNR also manages 75 state parks with 59 campgrounds, 10 resort lodges, 35 marinas, and 71 beaches. But that's not all. The Division of Natural Areas and Preserves protects over 30,000 acres of land through 140 state nature preserve and natural areas. The Nature Conservancy protects 38,000 acres of climate-resilient lands and 65,000 acres of land in total since 1958. Then there's the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, 32,783 acres administered by the National Park Service, which itself is adjacent to 4 reservations of the Cleveland Metro Parks and 11 Summit County metro parks. Ohio is getting greener by the day, and each year its substantial network of parks provides millions of people with the chance to experience every element of nature for themselves, including some of nature's greatest mysteries.
Don Keating, Keating. My connection to research in general, Bigfoot research in general, started in 1984 when I read John Green's Apes Among Us book. Coincidentally or ironically, or however you want to say it, a month later there was an article in the Newcomerstown News about 3 teenage boys who had seen a tall, 7 to 8 foot tall, dark brown or black colored creature on the other side of the Tuscarawas River, south of town, that was pulling leaves off of a tree and eating them. The boys were just walking around. They came across this animal, and that article was in the paper a month after I had read John's book. So as the old saying goes, one thing led to another, and this is where we are, 40 years later.
All right, my name is Jamie King. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and I live in Ohio, and most of my research is in Pennsylvania. And my background with Bigfoot was that I had an encounter in 2009 after my father passed away that was very physical on one hand and very spiritual on another hand. So it's taken me in a direction of looking at both things and trying to remain open with how I research. And I respect all researchers, how they research, and I look at things scientifically, and I try to be objective with everything that I see. And you know, like, I'm in Ohio right now, and Ohio might seem like a place that wouldn't have Bigfoot, but there are so many reports that come out of this state and Pennsylvania and West Virginia and the East Coast in general, where normally you think of Bigfoot on the West Coast or in Canada.
Hi, I'm Jenny King, and I've been doing paranormal research since 2004, and I've been doing Sasquatch research since 2009. My husband and I have been researching Bigfoot and Sasquatch from our location where we've been doing a micro study since 2009.
My name is Dr. Russ Jones. I am a BFRO researcher and organizer. I lead expeditions. I've written 2 books, Tracking the Stone Man and The Appalachian Bigfoot. I've been interested in Bigfoot largely my whole life. I've probably been active in research between 15 and 20 years.
All right, my name is Amy Boo, and my connection, I guess, started in 2012 when I saw something I couldn't explain. I was never into it before that, so I was like from 0 to 100. And now, flash forward to 2024, and I am doing a lot of different things. I am in charge of, I guess, of Project Zoo Book, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about. I am a member of the Olympic Project, which is based out in Washington, but I'm kind of a Midwest representative and get out there when I can. I do a lot of different speaking engagements with libraries and outdoor shows and do things with kids. And my favorite thing is to get out in the woods and look myself.
Wow. Well, yes. My name's Mark Matsky. My connection to the Bigfoot community is largely through small town monsters, writing and narrating films, and the research that's gone into all of that. It's taken me and the crew across the United States and even into Canada to research boots on the ground, some of these actual sites. So that's been quite an endeavor.
My name is Suzanne Ferenchek, and I became aware of Bigfoots in Ohio in 2013 when I had a road crossing near my home.
Can you go into your sighting?
Sure. I was coming home just on a little back dirt road near Nashville, tiny town of Nashville, and I stopped to take pictures of horses that were just on the side of the road in a place where they're not normally. And I sat there for probably about 5 or 10 minutes just taking in my scenery, and then I went to move forward and I looked, and there was a big black thing that jumped over the road in front of me. And My sister-in-law had been talking about Sasquatches the year before. And then she said, made a comment about something being squatchy where we were camping. And I said, what does that mean? I just came from a place of knowing absolutely nothing. And, maybe the Sasquatches were in the Pacific Northwest, but I never in a million years thought they were in Ohio. But I couldn't explain this big black creature that was jumping like this across the road in front of me, about 240 feet. And I just started laughing. I don't know, kind of giggling uncontrollably. Like, I guess it's because I had no reference points for what I was looking at. And it didn't land in the road. It just started its motion from the left, kind of a small hill. And then when I saw it, it was directly in front of me on the road in my vision, like this, with its legs coming around like it was going to land. And then it went down into this little ravine. And, my first thought that it was a deer, but there's no big black deer that are jumping over 7 feet in the road. So it just took a while to process it. And for the next 2 weeks, my family was kind of laughing at me and stuff. And, Suzanne thinks she saw a Sasquatch, And it wasn't until a couple days later that I Googled Bigfoot in Ohio. And then my mind was blown when I found all these websites, the bfro.net and everything. And then I clicked right down into Holmes County, where I live, and learned that there was a report from 11 months prior of a sighting with different cars, unrelated cars crossing the road, and a Sasquatch going right in between these cars. And that was really close to where my sighting was. And so that's just kind of like what started it all. And then I just got connected with some of the investigators, and so many things happened in the Mohican Flap in the next 2 years, and much of it was centered around my house. So it was a pretty crazy couple of years. So I just had to learn real fast everything I could about it. And now it's 11 years later, and it's kind of like the more you ask questions, the more questions you have. But I think I've sort of figured it out. And now it's just kind of wondering where they are and what they do and why.
My name is Doug Waller. I'm a Bigfoot investigator, researcher, author. I've been doing this about 19 years. I really got started on this when I took a job at the library, public library in Cambridge, and discovered they had Bigfoot books on the shelf, and I quickly read everything we had and started sending away to other libraries to get more to read. I had books coming and going all the time, really got interested in the subject, and found out that Salt Fork State Park, which was just 6 or 8 miles away from where I was working, had a lot of Bigfoot activity and reports. So we started researching every weekend, discovered that there was a local couple that I knew that had had a sighting at the park. I interviewed them, and we just started hitting the woods every weekend, looking for evidence. Within a couple years, we started a Bigfoot group, and we have meetings and campouts. Lots of people within the group have had sightings. I started writing down stories that I was getting from some of these witnesses, and wrote my first book in 2012, and I have 6 of them out now.
I'm John Hickenbottom. I'm the naturalist here at Salt Fork, and I've been here since 2012. Big part of my job is education. I spend a lot of time talking to the public, leading nature hikes. I do a lot of biological surveys and things like that. My background's in reptiles and amphibians and conservation work with those. I got into the education field because I wanted to share my passion with wildlife, or for wildlife with other people. I grew up here at Salt Fork, and growing up here, you hear stories about Bigfoot. Salt Fork's the Bigfoot capital of Ohio, and when you're local, you kind of disregard those stories. That's your crazy neighbors telling stories about Bigfoot. And as I started working here longer and talking to people who had experiences, I started to do some research on my own and get to know some of the local researchers, and doing some videos and things about Bigfoot here at Salt Fork started as kind of a personal interest because of a sound that I heard in the woods.
120 miles south of downtown Cleveland, one discovers a region completely distinct from the lakefront city and its surrounding metropolis. Not only is there a perceptible topographical change, but there is a notable cultural shift, obvious to even a casual observer, as city gives way to country and the influence of Appalachia comes to bear. That is intriguing enough. But then, there are the stories that for decades have told of something exceedingly strange that exists in the hollers of Guernsey County. Tales that have forever linked Bigfoot with Salt Fork State Park. Named for a salt well used by indigenous people, Salt Fork began to take shape in the mid-20th century. Plans for a man-made lake were the centerpiece of an ambitious effort to attract visitors to southeast Ohio, and to that end the state began acquiring land for that purpose in 1960. The process was not without controversy, since it meant that some families and individuals found themselves contemplating the sale and evacuation of generational land. Ultimately, the state acquired the acreage it needed, and work on an earthen dam was completed in 1967. The lake was born, in some cases washing over old homestead foundations. The lodge and conference center opened to travelers in 1972. It's striking to look at photographs from that era and see how much of the Salt Fork landscape was clear-cut at the time. But as the foliage returned, something else grew as well. The sense that something unusual accompanied the forest's resurgence. By the mid-1980s, a young man named Don Keating had begun collecting and investigating reports of hairy hominids in an area he called the Sasquatch Triangle. At its northernmost point was Newcomerstown in southern Tuscarawas County. The western point lands southwest of Coshocton near the village of Conesville, and the eastern point corresponds with Salt Fork State Park in northern Guernsey County. The land that falls within the triangle's border ranges from dense, rugged forest to sprawling cornfields and includes the Wills Creek watershed and the manufactured Salt Fork Lake. Within the triangle, it was clear that encounters with bipedal man-apes were happening with surprising frequency, from road-crossing sightings to close encounters with so-called white Bigfoot. Salt Fork, with its myriad waterways and streams, became a location in which sportsmen began having run-ins with large creatures drawn to the water. Off-the-record reports told of disturbances taking place during the construction of the lodge itself. Later, tales would be told of trails and campsites cordoned off, allegations of cover-ups having to do with a Bigfoot presence in the park. All of which set the stage for Salt Fork's emergence as a mecca for Sasquatchery, formalized when Keating's Ohio Bigfoot Conference moved from Newcomerstown to the state park in 2011. And this was just the beginning.
We have no formal reporting system here. However, me being the person that interacts with the public, I am often the one that hears people's stories. So yes, every year I get secondhand accounts more frequently than I get firsthand. Something came out of the woods and scared me. A lot of people remember an experience that they had when they were younger camping out here. I've talked to people that have experiences clear dating back through the 1980s here. And then I do get more recent reports. I mean, with a place like Salt Fork, there are reporters all of the time, or researchers out here all the time, and people do have experiences. So I often talk to them. I'm pretty friendly with most of the local research groups, so usually if something cool happens, I hear about it pretty quickly. They show me tracks. I've seen one set of tracks that I couldn't explain. I was left with two options. I was left with either the person that showed them to me had big wooden feet in their backpack and they were lying to me, or something else left them. Otherwise, most of the tracks that people bring me to are scuffs in the dirt, or they're bear prints. We do have a bear population. This is a huge park, so we do have a bear population. And a majority of the tracks that I see that people bring me to, usually bear. The Bigfoot research groups have taken me, at least one set of tracks I've seen were what I would deem like a possibility.
I've heard a few things, since you're talking state parks, I know like in Salt Fork, I've actually had a report from there where someone woke up, and it was weird where it was there's actually it's in the camping section, but where you take trailers and things. There was a lady who got up at 4:30 in the morning to go to use the outhouse, and says that she saw one rooting through the dumpster at the end. So I'm thinking that maybe certain things like that, they come a lot closer than we expect them to. And I'm wondering if they're kind of getting used to coming in for scrounging for food like that, where it's easy food and don't have to chase something down or dig something up.
So in 2018, I was out squirrel hunting with what's now my wife, because this is Appalachia and that's how you date. And we heard this long howl. And I'm pretty familiar with the noises that the animals here at Salt Fork are going to make throughout their life cycle, and I couldn't identify that one. With a little bit of digging, we compared it to the Ohio howl, and it was pretty close. Now, the one caveat to that is Salt Fork being well known to Bigfoot researchers. I have no proof or no evidence that there wasn't a Bigfoot researcher sound blasting on the next ridgeline over. I have no way of knowing what it was. All I can say is that I heard something in it, and it opened me up to the possibility of something being out here.
Bigfoot activity in Ohio's state parks seems to be governed by issues of physical necessity and curiosity. For example, numerous reports out of Salt Fork and the Wills Creek region tell of fishermen being warned off by Sasquatch with intimidating actions such as vocalizations, bluff charges, or rock throwing, ostensibly to keep them away from prize fish. In some documented cases, melon-sized rocks come arcing out of the tree line, landing in the water with a percussive splash near the fisherman's vessel, sending a clear message. A report from 2012 details a father and two sons discovering the carcass of a dead deer stashed under a rocky outcropping off Road 52 in Salt Fork. Whatever had killed the doe had exerted tremendous pressure on its jaw and neck, then ripped its belly open, taking only the liver. Photographs were taken of this gruesome find, suggestive of a powerful, selective predator. At times, the creature displays annoyance at being seen, as related in Tom Pretty's astonishing daytime sighting. Just off of Parker Road, Pretty and a fishing companion witnessed a Bigfoot drinking water from a creek. After quenching its thirst, the thing stood on two legs and climbed up the bank. That's when Pretty's friend coughed, which caused the figure to whirl around and lock eyes with him. It charged towards the creek, and no more than 20 feet away, screamed like a woman being murdered. After a tense standoff, the creature dropped to all fours and could be heard leaving the area through a stand of tall grass. On other occasions, the creature appears to simply be observing human behavior, as is the case of the Eddy family, whose experience on the Morgan's Knob Trail in Salt Fork in 2013 was presented on Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries, and in the book Hidden Encounters by Doug Waller. 3 of the Eddy children, 14, 11, and 5 years old, noticed a hair-covered Sasquatch peering out at them from behind a tree, and while startled, did not necessarily feel threatened by the attention. It was hypothesized that the Bigfoot had been hunting deer at the time of the sighting, and was waiting for the family to clear the area. An idea reinforced by the entire family, including both parents and an older sibling, hearing 3 distinct wood knocks near the end of their encounter. Curiosity also seems to drive interactions reported at Salt Fork's various camping areas, to the degree that one of them has been officially christened Bigfoot Ridge, while the group camp features a wooded hillside nicknamed the Bleachers. So many sightings have taken place there, it's as if Sasquatch used that spot to be spectators of human activity. We must put on quite a show.
I think that they're curious about people and what we do. And I think they can observe people in a state park from a safe distance. And then, of course, go see what's left over, in the campgrounds afterward, just like any other animal would do. But yeah, Ohio state parks, there's so many beautiful ones and such great habitat for them. So I think they can kind of crawl up and see what we're doing when they're interested, and then head back to wherever people aren't and continue on with what they normally do.
My name is Monica Bassett. I've been into Bigfoot for about 60 years. Pretty much patterns are people will see them in the woods or following a deer pack or making sounds. They'll see them road crossing.
The patterns are that people are present. That's the clearest one for me when I look at these things. People are present in these state parks. People are present in national parks and wilderness areas. They're hiking, they're recreational areas, and they're not overly trafficked either. So you're dealing with minimal traffic, but presence of humans and minimal human pressure. So that is the number one, congruency that you'll see with these sightings.
State and national parks are probably ideal for these creatures simply because you've got food sources, you've got lots of food sources. Think of all the campers and the hikers that are out there on the trail. And I don't mean by eating them, I mean by their food. We all waste food, and that's a fact. Look at some of the cases where these things have been seen going through trash bins. It's an ideal place, honestly. It's a buffet.
Patterns. If you're talking about like people like in a park maybe that are in a tent, something that you hear about is somebody in a tent where either a hand, something comes down on the tent and actually will grab the back of somebody's head. I've heard different experiences that people have had with that. Also with urinating on the tent. So I don't know, those are different experiences that I've heard maybe with somebody's camping in a park.
So in your opinion, what about like the state and national parks in Ohio make them a unique environment for Sasquatch activity?
That's a tough question because there's so much that we just don't know, But I would say honestly that I believe they're omnivores. I know that. I'd be confident of saying that. And I think we have just an abundance different kinds of food that they could access here. But it leads into like a whole lot of other questions, honestly. Like we were, you know, because I mean, we've had questions about why, like there's reports of ones here that could be white in Ohio. And I mean, it could be anything. It could be melanin, it could be, you know, they may be getting it, lack of it somewhere from part of their diet. You know, I know the one area that we found actually had some, it was like rare, had pecan trees, like here, some kind of northern pecan tree. I never had seen it, but that's where a lot of activity was happening. So I don't know, maybe they were there for something like that to try to, for some sort of supplement, I'm not sure.
Well, the fact that they're well kept from state and national organizations, the terrain, the habitat, the natural resources that are available there. I think that the fact that you have more sightings and track discoveries in state and national settings than anywhere else is due to the fact that you have a higher number of visitors, a higher number of people going through there.
Bigfoot tends to use more of the heavily wooded areas and stay off the trails as much as they can. So, and I think they're curious about us humans. You know, they can stand back in the shadows and observe us without us even being aware that they're out there.
State and national parks are much more pristine, I think, than a lot of places. I tend to look right outside of those parks, you know, not necessarily right in them, although I do that too. But I feel that just the protection that they have there, you know, there's not the hunting going on for the most part. Maybe that's right outside, so it just depends on where you're at. But it's interesting when you go to those parks. I've had a lot of the rangers or the park, you know, workers that have said, oh, you're crazy to think that there could be anything there. But on the flip side of that, there are people who have had a lot of experiences, or at least have had other people tell them their experiences. So it's kind of a little gold mine of a place to look. Just the kind of duh answer of a lot of land, a lot of forests.
It's what I call multi-use land. It offers a refuge, water, and food sources in that. And then outside of the area, it creates like farmland and different opportunities. So there's many different feeding sources. It has habitat, shelter, and all the things that would need for an animal like this to live there.
Well, state and national parks they have a lot of things that are good for Bigfoot. You know, they're a protected environment. Many of them don't allow hunting. There's almost always a wild population of varied animals, good food sources, good trash cans, dumpsters, things like that. Locally, there's some of the parks that have over 100 cabins with big dumpsters, and there's reports of Bigfoot being interested in raiding some of those. So I think that it's kind of a protected environment for them.
Well, they typically have a food source and cover. Sometimes they have caves or rock outcroppings.
I just think it's a situation where the setting is there, natural resources, the upkeep, where these things are likely to be moving through, and they're spotted because, like I say, there's a higher frequency of people moving through the area and accidentally or whatever seeing these things as they're in that area. I don't think they're there all the time. If they were, it'd be a lot easier to catch them or to get a lot better evidence of them. But I would say that's one of the reasons, or the main reason, that the state and national is prone to have a higher number of sightings.
I think because of the fact that our parks are set up to be visited, they're set up to be utilized by human beings, then the sightings that take place in those areas are going to gravitate naturally around those activities themselves. So that you have a large group of them having to do with camping. You know, there's a huge percentage of those sighting reports that happen because people were in their campsite, they're around the campfire, and they heard a sound or they saw eyes glowing across in the shadows from them, observing them. So that's one place to begin. I think are all the camping stories that go along with that.
I'm Mona Jones. I've always been intrigued with it and questioned it. I never felt that it wasn't something out there. I always kind of thought there was something there. And then when I took a camping trip to Mohican a few years ago and had some unusual things happen there. And that's kind of what even perked my interest even more.
What happened there?
We were in Mohican and it was a real rainy trip and there was no one else around. We were in the primitive area and everyone else had left the campground, and through the night it was awake and sounded like something was draining a tarp on my tent. We had our tent and we had the potty tent. Sounded like somebody was draining water from the tarp right onto the side of the tent. And when I got the tent home, you could smell urine on the tent. And there was a couple other things. We were laying there and you could hear the splashing as a couple of people were walking down the road, and you could hear chatter. You couldn't make it out, but it just sounded like a chatter of a man and a woman.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And like I said, there wasn't anybody else in the campground because the weather had been so bad.
A lot of the reports are taking place near water, which could be for any creature. But another one is it's normally, at least the ones that seem to be very believable, are people who were not looking for Bigfoot. And doesn't mean that they don't have an interest or not, but that just wasn't what they were doing at the time. You know, when we go out into the woods, we just say we're camping with a purpose or hiking with a purpose. And it seems like the people that are the witnesses there were not expecting any such thing. So I'd say that's a big thing that's the same.
And then fishing too seems to be an activity that they'll find a lot of reports centered around as Sasquatch are sighted either in the water or at the water's edge, as somebody's been, relatively still, either on the bank of a river or standing in the river to fish. That seems to create the opportunity for a sighting to take place. So it's around the recreational activities themselves that these patterns seem to emerge.
Or I've fielded reports where someone was out on the lake fishing and they detected movement on the shore. They thought a person was hiking or whatever, and they happened to see something over there on the shore, and it turned out being one of these creatures.
As well as then the transportation that's needed to get to and from those areas. So you have a whole host of classic road crossing sightings, or something standing by the side of the road, examining roadkill, or just watching what's happening.
Generally speaking, people are just going about their normal daily routine when they're in a state or national setting, and the sightings are just the run-of-the-mill sighting. It's normally somebody is driving down the road and the thing walks across the road in front of them.
In addition, there's hiking, which is a very natural place to be paralleled by something in the woods. There's a huge number of stories that tell some sort of narrative in which somebody is being followed, or when they stop, they hear these footsteps stopping, or to the degree that they feel aggressively escorted out of an area while they're hiking for whatever reason, or have a sighting of a creature, many times across from one ridge line to another, or something of that nature.
When you go to a state or a national park, you're there to relax, have a good time, fish, hunt, hike, whatever the case may be. And when you're doing that, then I think one of the characteristics of this creature is they're curious. And so if they're curious about you, they may watch the person on the boat out on the lake to see what they're doing. The person on the boat might happen to detect the motion on the land, and they catch a glimpse of each other, and there's how your encounter takes place.
I hear that a lot of people do have experiences in parks. I do, maybe, I don't know, I can't say for sure, but maybe, Sasquatch is kind of looking at these areas, maybe a little bit protecting. Like the native indigenous people thought that Bigfoot was like a brother to them, like a watcher that would kind of keep things safe. So maybe that has something to it.
I've noticed, I live near the Cog Valley National Park, and it seems to be seasonal. And then when I mean seasonal, it's not every year. It's like they have a circuit, and they might be in there for 1 year and they might not be there another year, and that they have a range, and then within that range they move around and they know where the food sources and things are at a certain time of the year.
Okay, so Hocking Hills, we had gone to this location where a woman had Bigfoot activity on their property. Hocking Hills in general is known for Bigfoot reports. And we were at this location, and again, there's a similarity with the way I think and sometimes how I put things out to the universe, and the way we think is very important. But we were in this area of Hocking Hills, and I remember we went out on this power line, and we're out on the power line, and we came across this partial footprint, and I documented the footprint, photographed it. Then my friends who are not Bigfoot researchers, we went back to the cabin, we sat at the cabin, we sat around the campfire, and this is where this part of it gets very similar to my other one. I talk a lot to the universe, I talk to God, and I said, Bigfoot, don't make me look stupid, because my friends were like, let's go back out on the power line where we found this footprint. And I said, don't make me look stupid, Bigfoot, that's just the way I was thinking. And we went out on this power line, and I remember we went up on where it crested, and we're all standing there, and all around us are like thousands of fireflies. And we all stood there, and we're all thinking to ourselves, this is like the most beautiful sight that we could possibly ask for. I didn't care if we had any kind of encounters, but we're standing there watching these fireflies, and then off to our right we hear a vocalization, and then off to the left we hear a vocalization. So it was like we're in the middle of this conversation, and my wife has a recorder running, so she had this recorder luckily on her. But during this whole thing, we had documented a tree being uprooted and thrown at us. I can't say what threw it at us, but I know that you could hear this tree being pulled out of the ground, and it landed near one of the people that were with us.
I'm out.
So when you put yourself in situations like you're at a site where they have had Bigfoot encounters, it's possible to have something happen, but it's also, you could be there for days and have nothing happen. I think we may have talked about this earlier, but you can put yourself in situations like that. But then I think to myself, sometimes it's the power of our thoughts in our mind. And, you have to ask yourself too, are people imagining that they're having encounters? And I don't, that's very possible, but I know I wasn't imagining that we had an encounter because we had this tree thrown at us. And I know that I don't think a human could do that. And the only other thing that I could think of, and as I talked to people that were local, they said that they have wild boar in southern Ohio, but I don't think a boar is throwing a tree at somebody. It could probably uproot it, but you constantly have to be aware of how you're thinking, and you're not making things up in your mind.
So for me personally, it all goes back to conservation efforts. If you looked at Ohio at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, Ohio went from being 95% forested, and we're talking old growth, massive virgin uncut timber, to being, some estimates are as low as 6% forested, some are as high as 12. By the mid 20th century, people started becoming more conservation minded, and you started having local, state, and government bodies form things like national parks and state parks and city parks, and they started habitat regeneration, basically. In the 1950s in Ohio, if a deer was spotted, it made the newspaper. Now you see them everywhere. We're overpopulated with deer, Same goes with many creatures. I mean, bears slowly moving back into the area. We have bobcats again. So I think to me, it all goes back to conservation. Those conservation efforts in the mid-20th century are now paying off, and we're seeing more wildlife in general. And if we're postulating that Bigfoot is indeed a flesh and blood living animal, a part of an ecosystem like black bear and things like that, then it would make more sense to me as the forests regenerate in Ohio. And if you look at the eastern part of Ohio, it's a big green blob. If you look at the vegetative map, it's a big green blob all the way down into the Ohio River Valley and down south. And this is a pretty quintessential Appalachian mixed hardwood forest here. So there's plenty to eat, there's plenty of shelter, we have plenty of water. So I think the reason why you're seeing more reports come out of places like Ohio is because the forest is mature and there's habitat here. And if an undiscovered primate exists, this is prime habitat for that sort of thing.
Parks bring people into proximity with wildlife, so it's only natural that interactions between the two will occur. When those encounters turn unpleasant or dangerous, the first impulse is to call the authorities. But within the park system, it's not always crystal clear whose problem this becomes. While there have been whispered rumors of trail and campground closures in Salt Fork due to Sasquatch activity, it's often tragic accidents that shut an area to traffic. Visitors to Hosak's Cave are confronted with signage warning of the fall risk from the apex, and memorials to those who have died there drive home the point that the woods can be a lethal place. Still, it's worth considering what actually happens when a person reports a Bigfoot sighting to a park official. Is there an investigation that takes place? Is the sighting entered into some sort of official database? How seriously is the subject taken by those who oversee the parks? Is it possible that those who patrol and administer our parks know things about the Bigfoot enigma they're not telling the public? There are some plausible reasons for institutional reluctance to disclose a Sasquatch presence on public lands, perhaps the most obvious being the fear factor. Parks depend on visitors making use of them, and the official announcement that Bigfoot roams freely through our forests might result in empty campgrounds, especially if such an admission included the information that an encounter might turn deadly. One might expect a robust debate regarding the status of said creature. For instance, are they an endangered species? More human than animal? The implications of an answer are perhaps more broad than first thought, intersecting with industrial concerns and messy legal entanglements. In 2024, fracking is back in the news in the Salt Fork region. Fracking is the process of injecting liquid into the ground at high pressure to extract oil or gas. In 2023, 2 drilling parcels at Salt Fork were awarded to a West Virginia-based company to the tune of $58.4 million. If it was known Sasquatch habitat, would this project have been greenlit? Would it have mattered?
So based on conjecture or reports that you've heard, do you think that there's knowledge on the part of park officials that these creatures are there? And if so, are they trying to hide it or not talk about it? Are they pretty open about it?
If you had asked the question in 1985, the answer would have been there's some knowledge, but there's not nearly as much as there is today, 40 years later. I suppose depending on the rules or whatever that the state park has or that the national park has, they're either going to release the information as they get it if someone inquires about it or not. I know that there are a lot of interesting discoveries that have taken place in the past X number of years in eastern Ohio that has yet, as of today, to hit the mainstream media. And that I know for a fact is being kept under wraps by someone that's higher up that runs a state or a national park.
The way I approach parks is I try to have a personal relationship with all the park rangers and managers, and that takes years for you to develop a relationship and trust. And I don't know of any park in West Virginia or Ohio that I've visited and formed a relationship with that there has not been at some point Bigfoot activity that the rangers have experienced, whether they have heard purported sounds, they have actually had a sighting. It's common. I think that the local rangers are very separated from the bureaucracy in Washington that might, be hiding something or not want something found out. I think that probably what happens is that there's not a systemic attempt to hide Bigfoot if Bigfoot would exist, that it's more of a few people in Washington. I mean, I say this because, when you're seeing patients all day, patients and humans in general aren't very good at keeping secrets. And so I think that inevitably most of the time that someone they would tell somebody, or they would tell their doctor, or they would tell a friend, and people would start hearing or something along those lines. And you really just don't see that with that. You don't hear stories. So I think that I just don't go along with that conspiracy theory. I think that there may be a few people that are doing it, but I don't think it's some type of systemic thing to keep the public from knowing that Bigfoot exists.
The first part of that, I think you can definitively say that park officials know that there are Sasquatch being sighted because they're being reported to them consistently. And that can work the other way around. In Don Keating's book, The Sasquatch Triangle, he tells of park rangers, presumably at Salt Fork State Park in Ohio, who were bringing reports to him because they knew that he was interested in the subject and was compiling reports. So it can work both ways. Also, Doug Waller has a number of stories that he tells in his books, in particular Hidden Encounters, one of which is, I think, probably par for the course as far as rangers are concerned. And that is, this young man around between 1995 and 2000 had a sighting at Delaware State Park in Delaware County. Fairly close range sighting, between 20 and 30 feet, of a large sort of chestnut colored creature just standing there. And so, frightened, of course, he went, reported his sighting to the closest park official that he could find, who surprised him by saying, well, that's interesting because I had a sighting last week of a very similar looking creature. The mistake that ranger made is that he reported it to his boss, who promptly told him, you need to go get a drug test. So I think what is happening, most likely at the state park level, and probably some at the national park level as well, is that people are reporting sightings to them, but there's more of a horizontal pressure to keep it quiet. If you value your job, you just won't say anything. Not because there's some edict that's been handed down from above saying you must not speak about the Sasquatch topic, but just a more general sort of practical, if I say something about this, my job is probably at stake, so I'm going to kind of keep it quiet.
Well, we experienced that at Salt Fork State Park years ago, where none of the employees in the park would want to speak about Bigfoot, if we asked questions or anything. And after, there were a couple of programs that aired featuring Salt Fork, and once the cat was out of the bag, the rangers were, I guess, allowed to speak about it, and come to find out that they hadn't actually had sightings themselves, but they had taken reports from some of the people. And there's a couple of them now that I'm friends with, and actually, whenever I see them, I ask them if they've seen anything or heard anything. We exchange information. And some of the newer ones are reluctant to climb on board the Bigfoot train. They still need to see or hear something for themselves, but I think eventually they probably will.
But it's interesting, there are other stories as well. I mean, Doug Waller also has a case where This was in Seneca Lake State Park, which is down in Guernsey County, north of Salt Fork, where it was towards the end of the season, and for some reason that's never really clearly explained, the ranger had heard about if you make a certain type of sound, you may attract Sasquatch creatures to come in. So they were trying that. And so the person who brought this report to Doug was not the ranger, but told about the ranger making the sound, and evidently was too good at it because something did respond and something did show up, and they left rather abruptly to get out of the area. So there's an unusual case in which a ranger was kind of experimenting with, okay, if I try to interact with these creatures in some way, maybe they will respond. At the national park level, I have no idea what's going on there, except the one experience I've had is of interacting with a park ranger at Olympic National Park in Northwest Washington. And the brief exchange that we had there was kind of lighthearted and asking, do you have any Bigfoot reports to share with us? And he kind of laughed and informally suggested that there is an unofficial off-the-books tally of reports that they keep sort of month by month, and shared with us. We were there in late April, early May, and they said it's been busy so far as that was concerned. So I don't know how serious that was, with just being good-natured and joking around with us, or was there actually some sort of non-official tally that they're making. But again, I don't have a sense that rangers are trying to keep a lid on it, or that they've been told you mustn't talk about this, but it's more out of a sense of self-preservation that they kind of keep it on the down low, and they're willing to talk about it with people who come in. Clearly what's happened over time is people have shared reports with them.
I don't know about the cover-up, but I do know there have been, park officials that come forward and say, yeah, that, they do know that they're there. People have taken reports, or people that take reports in certain areas have talked to certain park officials, and some are willing to come forward and say, yeah, we have experienced it, or, we do know that other campers and visitors have noticed things that, others say don't exist there. So
I know there's a lot of talk about cover-ups. Everybody wants a cover-up. I have not personally heard anything about that, honestly. The only thing that comes to mind would be, back when we were interviewing, I think it was Glenn Adkins at one point. We had to sit down with him, and he was telling us about back in the early days when they were doing their research. It was discouraged at Salt Fork, but now it's embraced to the point to where they have gift shops featuring, Bigfoot. So I think it's completely the opposite now. It may have once been. It may have once just been like the stigma surrounds every other strange and paranormal phenomena like UFOs.
Contrary to what a lot is said in the mainstream Bigfoot community and such, I've never ran across a concerted effort to cover anything up. And I work in state parks as well, and what I do is interesting. They find it fun, and I've experienced more inquisitiveness from the other employees than anything else. When it comes to rangers in other areas, I can't say that I know of any kind of cover-ups, so to speak, or that there's a suppression of any kind of information. They normally scoff at you and laugh at you like, oh God, another one of these guys. That's honestly the reaction that I'm met with in most places, but they recognize us as a benign source. So we're normally, at least we aren't, met with any kind of hostility. They recognize what we're doing, and they just think we're going to be out in the woods having fun and enjoying ourselves like the rest of the people.
That's the question, right? I mean, I'm not the world's biggest conspiracy theorist, if you want to put it that way, but I wonder about it. I do think there's a difference. Personally, when I was out in Montana, myself and some of the members of my group were out on the Blackfoot Reservation. We were invited out there to do research. and we were right on the outskirts of Glacier National Park on the Blackfoot private land. And the difference between the people that you would talk to on the reservation and the people you would talk to in the actual national park was drastic. So on the reservation, people would just say what they call the inimitapi, and hopefully I'm saying that right, was just part of their life. It was absolutely real, absolutely still around, and they would tell you stories about seeing one in their dumpster or seeing one walking a ridgeline. Wasn't even a question. And then when you would go into the park, we had a lot of people that laughed at us, a lot of different rangers, but then we had a few that were really interested in it, and they were like, it wasn't like they said, well, we're not allowed to talk about this, but it was more, they said that they have an interest, you would be surprised. So they didn't come right out and say anything like that, but it was interesting, the difference. And one younger ranger who said that he has had stories told straight to him there in Glacier National Park. In Project Zubik, we have a lot of different people that come on as guests, and one of them was a gentleman who was involved in a national park, which I can't say which one or anything, but he pretty much did say that there are things going on that they don't really talk about a lot.
State officials are much more open nowadays. When I first came, it would not be uncommon for you to get rousted, where they say, what are you doing? And then you pull out a thermal and a night vision. They say, okay, you're not doing drugs, you're not getting drunk. State officials in Ohio are very much open. We've worked with the state parks of Ohio and the Muskegon watershed to put on Bigfoot events and stuff like that, so they're much more open to it. The federal, unfortunately, they're still quiet and very tight-lipped about anything that they do. You might hear stories that are told to other people that you know out of channels and stuff like that, but you never hear it directly from them.
Well, in my experience, they have been more open about it in the past couple of years. I was involved with putting together the Pleasant Hill Lake Bigfoot Base Camp event in the Mohican area, and that is run by the Muskegon Watershed Conservancy District, which owns 20% of the waterways in the eastern part of Ohio. And there was a sighting in that park in August of 2020. And I found out about it like a couple days later, and so then I went down there and spent the night in that one spot. And it was a Sasquatch that had kind of, was harassing a young family, a mother and a father, a toddler and a baby. And they were really scared about it. And the mother called 911, and the ranger came out and talked to them. And then by the time I got there, a couple days later, I was asking the ranger about it. And I said, do you think this was legit? And he's like, well, they were scared enough to call the cops. And this creature had, after it was done throwing rocks and sticks at their tent, it had moved through the campground and then past the outhouse and just kind of smacked the top of the outhouse on its way out of the campground. So as a result, they actually took that report and they shared it with the BFRO, and were very generous about building 2 events centered around that event. So I think in that case, it was one of the first reports that I know of that a government agency in the state of Ohio endorsed and embraced. So I think it has come a long way. Now, I could tell you from, my experience in the Mohican area, it was really hard to get people to talk back in, the early, 13 and 14 when all this was going on. And slowly, it's taken me a long time to build up the network of people that now I'm known as the Bigfoot lady, in Loudonville. And so if there is a report or questions or, things that come out, fortunately, I get called. But people are talking about it now, and I think they feel safer to talk about it now. They're not going to get ridiculed as much. But I also think that the government agency, publishing that report and endorsing it helped a lot.
I can even tell you a story about an area that had activity, still does occasionally, but it's been years. They have two great big lakes in this facility, and it's about 600 plus acres. And what happened was we had been out there just researching, but I was fishing. So then we were sitting there and we heard a yell, and I thought, oh, that's cool. And I was actually trying to get a recording, but the audio I had at the time was just not great, And so we were sitting there, and the park district was there. They were doing a survey on fish. So they had a boat out there that had a bunch of lights on it. I remember it's like 8, 4 and 4, and it shines into the water, and they zap the water and measure the fish and see how the thing's doing. Well, when we were there, there was these yells, and they were the only people there with us. This was like at 1 in the morning, and the park closes at 11 unless you're fishing. And so they were out there doing the survey, and there was this one very distinct yell came from the woods across the lake, and we watched them actually shine the lights into the woods. And I don't know if they actually saw something here, but it used to be that you could be in the woods up until 11. Like you could 11 o'clock, park closes, you can't go in nowhere. But they changed it, and you're not allowed to go anywhere now around this lake, these two lakes, after 8 p.m. You have to only stay around the lake now to fish. You can't go into the woods to go around the lake and things. And it's clearly marked 8 o'clock, that's it. No, you can't go in there anymore. So I think that they probably saw one and put something in order just to kind of keep it quiet for the area. There's a lot of strange things that happened in the area, including, there was a farm there that had a few incidents with missing alpacas, of all things. Yeah, so, you never know. So, but that's a different story. I can tell you some other time.
I feel they cover things up. I've talked to quite a few, especially persons or officers over 50 that just say it's a bunch of baloney, that you're just imagining things. I see that the younger generations, 40 and under, think it might be possible, but I don't have much faith in the officers telling you the truth. Well, I knew one guy that was with the Ohio DNR, and he was a hunter education guy, and whenever I'd ask him, he would say, oh no, there's no such thing. He's since passed, and now his daughter-in-law says, oh yeah, they're out there, and she is just a couple generations under him, but she feels that they are.
And for me, though, it was validation of everything that we had done, all the research we had done, everything leading up to that point, to me standing here, and there it was, in physical form, there he was. So we came back up to the bridge. It took my research partner quite some time to get me settled down. He ended up walking out into the marsh, and he went to the tree. At this point, I could not even see him. He had to pick up a stick and wave it in the air for me to see him. And then the next thing I know, he hollers at me, and he's like, you got to get out here. You got to see this. So I make my way out there, and where it had turned and stepped in the muddy bank was his impression. And it was 18.5 long. It was 9.5 wide. So we did cast that. I have that cast. And then with my background growing up, I've tracked my whole life. I was taught how to track. I'm an avid hunter. We were able to track through the marsh and track him back to where he had dropped down off the ridge and crossed the road. But in the marsh were impressions in the ground, and we were able to take that cast, and they fit perfectly inside these impressions. And this particular footprint it stands out because his little toe is spayed to the far. It was a left or a right foot, and the little toe was spayed far right. So it was an odd print to begin with. So to find the impression, you know, along his trackway was major as well. It was a fire that fueled in me, because now I had to know. My research just catapulted at that point to now I need to figure out what it is. You know, how do I figure out what it is? With my background as being a tracker, when I got into this so many years ago, I brought that with me, and I knew coming into this, if there was a creature out there, I had to know what I was looking for when tracking it. How do I identify what it is? And that took me a very long time. I mean, I was 3 years out here just trying to identify what it was that I was looking for. Once I ruled out human track, known animal track, and getting on what I knew were bipedal steps, but not human, I had trackway. From there, then it was establishing travel pattern. Then we could come in front of them. We could set up in front of them, and we could document them coming through. You know, so many people take it and they'll take a picture or something of a broken tree or a washed out, just a washed out piece of ground thing, and it could look like an impression. And they'll take a picture of it and they'll throw it out there on social media and claim it to be something more than what it truly is. And then they'll throw a researcher on top. I'm a researcher, you know, and that's not research. Research, you know, it's collecting data everywhere. It's not just assuming it's something that this subject created. It's finding answers. It's following answers. It's digging in deeper to what it is that you're looking at and taking it out there and seeing if you can find it in other locations. Once you're able to do that, then you start building the theory. Once you start building that theory, a lot of facts come from theories. A lot of facts are created by theories, but you can't just take a picture and throw it out there and say, yeah, Bigfoot did this.
There is simply nowhere else in Ohio as associated with Sasquatch as Salt Fork State Park. Thanks to television shows like Monster Quest and Finding Bigfoot, the park has become a household name, at least among Bigfoot enthusiasts of every interest level. The Ohio Bigfoot Conference is a mainstay of the park's annual schedule, and Bigfoot paraphernalia is available for purchase in both the lodge gift shop and camp store. What does it all mean? Is it a tacit admission of the reality of Sasquatch? In a 2024 interview conducted by Micah Hanks, Salt Fork State Park naturalist John Hickenbottom addressed this question in an insightful way. With respect to the mission of the park, he referred to Bigfoot as a resource, in what would seem to be the opposite of a cover-up. The park has embraced the mystery for the purposes of attracting visitors, boosting the local economy, and setting the stage for environmental education to take place, to teach people while they're on vacation, as Hickenbottom says. The naturalist is careful to say that he is no whistleblower. Instead, his skills, interests, and experience enable him to interpret the evidence for Sasquatch thoughtfully and in a way that encourages an appreciation for nature's many wonders. And who knows? One of those wonders just might be Buckeye Bigfoot.